Hello, everyone. This is MBA Secrets, and we have an amazing guest today. A former managing director of an e-commerce company, a venture capitalist, a tech entrepreneur, and a Stanford Graduate School of Business student, Dima Kalichkin. So, Dima, why Stanford?
First of all, hey everyone. I'm really glad to be here today and share some of my experiences with you guys. I think I'd like to start from why did I decide to do MBA in the first place before going into why Stanford particularly. When I realized that I want to try to go to business school was when I was working I was leading quite a big team in a fashion e-commerce company that I was working for before business school. When I joined the company, it was a relatively small 200 people startup. When I was leaving in a few years, it was 3,000 people, huge organization. And over the course of these 3 years, the team that I was managing grew tremendously. And at some point, I just realized that I'm struggling to contribute to the development of the team that I'm managing. And everything I learned about business was always in learning by doing. I have a very technical undergraduate and master's. And so one big reason for me was to learn some of the leadership skills and to learn some of the soft skills that are required for me to be an efficient leader and that will allow me to better contribute to the development of the people that are working in my team. So this was one reason. Second reason was that growing up and going to university in Russia as my undergrad and master's, I had relatively limited access to the international labor market. I could have gotten some job outside Russia, but it would have been quite challenging. And I really wanted to become citizen of the world, if you will, and have access to all kinds of opportunities that are all around the world or in other countries. Uh, so yeah, I think, and third point was just developing the network of likely-minded individuals that could be valuable to me in my career and personal life going forward. These are the three goals, and when I looked at where I want to be in terms of what school do I want to go, I realized that I was in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I enjoyed building companies, and I want to stay in the entrepreneurial ecosystem at least for the next whatever mid-term phase of my life. And Stanford is arguably the best place to go to in terms of different business schools, just because it's in the heart of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is the world hub of innovation, entrepreneurship. So I didn't honestly I didn't consider many more schools. I only applied to Stanford and luckily got in.
Yep. So, you decided to go to Stanford because Stanford is the best place for future entrepreneurs.
Of all the business schools, I think this is the best or one of a couple of the best schools for aspiring entrepreneurs. Second one probably being MIT, uh, just due to the whole infrastructure of entrepreneurial ecosystem that exists in both of these schools, and in addition to just the schools, in the cities that these schools are situated in. Both Boston and San Francisco and Bay Area are world-renowned hubs of innovation, and I, I assume that San Francisco is more of such. So ended up deciding to apply to Stanford.
What type of people study at Stanford?
That's a good question. It's a very diverse and healthy mix of people with different backgrounds, both geographically and professionally. As any business school, there is a solid share of ex-consultants or people aspiring to go to consulting or investment banking or other financial institutions, private equity, hedge funds, mutual funds. And then there is a group of people who worked in tech, not necessarily in startups, but in large tech, namely Facebook, Google, HP, Apple, you name it, Airbnb. I mean, there is a share of people with non-traditional backgrounds. What does Stanford call non-traditional? It is people with not business careers before business school. So we have ex-military guys in my class. We have a guy who used to be a independent theater director in New York. Teachers, doctors. And then there are people who have built companies before, or people who worked in startups before and want to become a founder of the company afterwards. And I'm basically in this last bucket. So I would struggle to tell you the exact ratio of people in each group, but each group is sizable enough.
How do I know that I fit into Stanford?
I think there is no better place, no better way to learn about it than to talk to people who are at Stanford or who went to Stanford. When I was applying, I spoke to a few alums whom I could reach back in Moscow, and usually thing that I underestimated before going to business school is that alumni are usually very responsive to potential applicants. I tried to reach out to these guys through my network and found maybe 2 or 3. And but I think even if I have just written an alum that I found on LinkedIn that, hey, I'm applying, could you help me? There is a very solid chance that just a person would respond to a random dude, and then a random dude like me, and spend half an hour talking about his experience of going to Stanford. Alumni community is very responsive usually. So this is one way. Second thing is just thinking about what do you want to get out of business school, and just contrasting it with the strength of the business school that has. Stanford obviously has a lot of strength in the tech community. That's one way to look at it. Second way to look at it, it probably has one of the densest networks in San Francisco Bay Area and on the West Coast of United States. So if you strongly think that you want to live in California, Stanford probably is a good place to go.
Well, so I understand that it's difficult to say that there is a common trait of character or something that makes all the students at Stanford similar. What makes them similar is probably the goals to be in the tech community, the goal to be in entrepreneurship, and the goal to probably be in the Bay Area. Is that right?
Not necessarily. I think those are like dominant traits, but I wouldn't say they unite everyone. There is a sizable share of my classmates who go and work in finance in New York. It is probably less than those who stay in tech in California, but it is still like maybe 10 to 20%, maybe like closer to 10, but still. So I think about half stays in Bay Area and half goes all over the world. So I mean, there are some common character traits, like people are very self-studying, very motivated, very ambitious, but those would be the traits that are maybe not specific to Stanford, but just specific to the crowd that goes to good business schools. So it is a very diverse group, and I think intentionally from Stanford, they don't want to just become this hub of tech people, because you never know what you're going to be doing in 10 to 15 years, and having some diversity in the pool of people whom you know in the alumni community is definitely beneficial. So it's definitely not a mono industrial business school, but with more emphasis on tech than many others, if not any other.
So my conclusion is that Stanford is a pretty diverse school with some emphasis on tech, right?
Yes, I think this would be a good summary.
Okay, talking about the diversity of Stanford then, what do you think are your most memorable and most important experiences at Stanford?
So coming here for the first time and just meeting all the people, just the first whatever few weeks of meeting all these incredible people from all over the world was really, really interesting. It is probably the most interesting crowd that I've ever been a part of, for sure. Uh, One thing, academically, there are a few classes that I really liked and that I learned a lot from. So one class, it's called Managing Growing Enterprises. It's taught by a guy called Joel Peterson, who is a very successful investor throughout 40 years of his career. Started in real estate and now is investor in all kinds of businesses. But he actually talks about not investing. He talks about uh, how do you manage difficult conversations in the workplace that are an inevitable part of any working process. If you have to fire someone, if you have to have a complicated conversation with your investors. And there, it goes for the whole quarter, and we explore different facets of what a successful leader, what kind of difficult conversations a successful leader should be able to engage. And the class is built around the role plays. So you are given some story about the company before class, and then you go to class, and you half of the class is just discussing and analyzing what happened, and then the second half of the class is you versus professor or you versus one of your classmates role playing a particular conversation between two protagonists of the case, and it gets pretty intense. People didn't cry, but it was very visible that people were uh,
Emotional.
emotional. Yeah, emotional would be a good word. So this is one good class. Another good class, and there is a whole plethora of classes in this space. The class I took is called Startup Garage, and it falls into a category of so-called design thinking classes. And design thinking is a school of thought about how do you approach uh, very complicated problems that are not necessarily analytical, but basically how do you design solutions to a problem? And you can define it as broadly as you want. Is it a user interface, or is it a particular business model that is solving a particular need? And the school of thought originated at Stanford. There is a design school that this class is being taught with. So it's partially design school, partially business school class. And you just learn a lot about how do you approach solving your customers' problems and how to make sure that you don't end up building something, in this case, a startup or a company, that you think is cool, but no one else think brings them any value. How do you distill this pain point that a customer has, and how do you translate it to a solution that you're building? So that one was a very good class.
What about touchy-feely class?
Awesome question. I'm in it right now.
Do you like it?
I like it really much. Given the fact that I'm in the process of going through it right now, I'm not sure I fully reflected upon and internalized all the learnings yet, but I already see some of the shifts in my behavior that basically how I start changing my communication style and my communication patterns based on the some of the theories and learnings of this class. The class is basically about how do you make sure that your interpersonal relationships and how do you make sure that your group dynamic is healthy, and how do you build these relationships? Not necessarily even in the workplace. It even helps me to look better at how I build my friendships, for example. But referring to the workplace, I think a good summary can be that there is very often the deadline and a certain group dynamic that you have, and we very often, concentrating on the deadline, sacrifice the relationships that exist within the team. So there is a process and there is a target of this process, and by default most of the business people, it's just the way I think there are many reasons for that. We always optimize for end result and are ready to sacrifice the process for the end result. But sometimes you have to sacrifice the end result for the process And sometimes it doesn't make much sense to proceed towards a certain goal if you have a subgroup of your group that is not proceeding with you. And how do you make these trade-offs? And how do you, first of all, notice that something is going wrong? How do you make sure that you're repairing the things that are going wrong? And how do you choose between uh, basically sacrificing people in lieu of achieving a goal, or do you want to sacrifice the goal in lieu of keeping the team intact so that in the long term you can achieve 10 more goals as opposed to achieving this one and losing half of the team?
So it seems like this class is pretty much aligned with your overall initial goal of developing into a better leader. So it seems like it helps you become an emotionally aware leader.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and it seems like the whole curriculum at Stanford really helps you do that. So become a better leader thanks to better interpersonal relationships, understanding the people better, and using this understanding in order to build meaningful relationships.
Yes and no. So the curriculum is quite flexible. It is more flexible than in many other schools. So I don't want to kind of black and white here, but just for comparison, Harvard, for example, all your first year is the courses that you cannot choose, and then all your second year is your electives that you choose by yourself. While here you have 50% of your first year as obligatory imposed on you classes, kind of so-called management foundations that just make sure everyone is on the same page. But already starting from the winter quarter of the first year, you can choose the classes that you're taking. So it gives you more flexibility in constructing the curriculum that meets your needs. And if you want to improve your emotional awareness as a leader, you can concentrate on that. If you want to improve your financial modeling skills, you can concentrate on that. And there are more, I don't know, 10x more classes taught at Stanford than you can take over the course of 2 years.
That's right. That's why you need to know what your goal is when going to an MBA at Stanford, because there's just so many things to choose from. And if you don't know what to choose, you're lost, I guess.
Yes, and I went through the phase of being lost in the beginning of my first year. So I think returning back, I would have spent more time before my first week, just spending more time reflecting on what I really want to do out of it, and maybe talking to more people on like what are the different options that I might get out of it, so that I have a more crisply formed uh, target of what I'm doing. But you're absolutely right.
Well, Dima, it seems like even though you got lost somewhat at the very beginning of the first year, you managed to deal with it quite successfully because you got a great internship at a venture capital firm in New York. So can you please tell us a bit about this experience?
Venture capital is a pretty unusual industry. It is being talked about relatively a lot in the tech circles, but if you look at the number of people who work in venture capital industry, it is comparable to the number of people that play in European League, like UEFA level professional sports, football players. So it is actually a very small industry. And it is a very weird industry in a way that it doesn't really allow for much organic growth for people who join the teams at relatively junior positions. And if I were to join, I would have joined and I joined at a relatively junior position. Most of the partners of the venture funds usually come from outside the fund, either being a successful entrepreneur in the past or being a successful investor in other asset classes.
So if you are a venture capital analyst, you shouldn't really expect too much from growing professionally in a venture capital firm.
There are cases that when this happens, but those are more of the exceptions, and
Okay.
It happens more in Europe, and it happens less in the United States.
Okay.
So why I went to VC, I didn't. I went in with a hypothesis that I wouldn't want this to be a career, but I went in with a desire to learn how investors think. Spending all of my career on the operating side of the world, I was never exposed to investors much, and it was very curious to just see how what is the mindset of an investor? How do they make these decisions? There was one reason, and second reason was to just see a lot of startups, see a lot of different business models applied to different verticals, different industries, and different geographies, compare and contrast, and just educate myself on what is out there, what kind of businesses exists in general. And I think I accomplished both. The process of looking for an internship in a VC firm is quiet and structured, as opposed to some of the other recruiting processes one can imagine.
Yeah, consulting, investment banking, for example.
Consulting, investment banking, even if you compare it to tech firms and even tech startups, very few venture funds actually publish that, okay, we are hiring an intern. And not everyone does it in general, but even those who do, very few of them uh, publish their positions. So you have to network your way in, if you will, talking to a lot of people and trying to figure out which funds would be more inclined to take an intern, and why would they be inclined to take an intern. And I think this is, I'm speculating here. I don't know the exact answer, but my guess would be that venture capital is all about connections and being able to network your way into the deal. So if you look at it, this is kind of like a part of the assessment process. Can you network your way into the recruiting process? Is a is an indicator of how good you will be in building the relationships and building a network as a venture capital investor and bring good deals to the firm. So it for me it was, as I said, a quite an unstructured process. I talked to a lot of alumni of Stanford. Quite a lot of venture capitalists came on campus and delivered presentations. So I sent email to them. Some of them responded, so I had follow-up conversations with them, and this went down to like interview process in 3 or 4 firms, and I got 2 offers and accepted one of them. So it was quite a tiring process, I wouldn't lie. Much less structured than a more standard positions, but I'm happy that I went through it, and I think, as I said, I got what I wanted out of my summer internship.
So I see that you really got what you wanted, but I understand that you are moving into something else after graduation. And I heard that you've got a very interesting idea about a startup. Can you share your thoughts about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually very interesting, and it ties to why did I decide the particular firm that I ended up working for. So when we were talking with them, I was pretty open to them that I don't see VC as a career, but as a mean to an end, if you will, of becoming trying to build my own company, which was my original intent of going to Stanford. And what they offered to me was a pretty interesting setup when I work with them part time throughout the summer as an investor. I then have an option to continue working with them part time throughout the school year, which I did and still do, and but slowly phasing out of that. And then, if I want to, I could either join them as full-time investment associate, or I could join them as what they call here, and this name of the position, I first heard it when I came to Silicon Valley, something that is called Entrepreneur in Residence, EIR. And what does it mean? It means a lot of different things in different VC firms. What it means for them particularly is that I joined them with I joined the firm with a target to start a company, and I'm sitting within the VC fund, exploring different areas and business opportunities that might present a good opportunity to build a business out of. And once me and the partners agree on a particular business opportunity, uh, the fund invests the first certain amount of money in the company. So why is it good for them? For them, it's a cheaper access to a pre-approved early stage business idea. Why is it good for me? For me, they provide a lot of support as a first-time founder, especially as a first-time founder in the United States, because I had some limited experience of working in the US, but it was more of a long business trip than a proper career experience. And for me, it's just some downside protection and support in the first company that I'm going to be building. And I'm now basically transitioning into this phase of my experience with them. So I'm phasing out of the investment operations that I was helping them with, and start to look at a particular industry, thinking about what kind of business can be built there and exploring one particular business idea.
And so this is exactly what you're going to do right upon graduation, right?
Yes.
Did you have or do you have any problems with the work permit in order to continue this work upon graduation?
Great question. Work permit and the easier, having more options of how to work is another reason why I'm working on my business idea within the structure of a venture capital fund, as opposed to just doing it by myself. Because having a formal employer at the early stages of building a business provides you with more options than just trying to build a business of your own. There are ways how you can be an entrepreneur right out of the door post-graduation. You can, going into some of the technicalities, you usually, when you're a student on an F1 visa, and when you graduate, you have additional 12 months, if I'm not mistaken, or 15 months of work permit that is just granted to you upon graduation, with some paper pretty much granted. And you can be a self-employed entrepreneur over the course of this 12 months. And then you have these 12 months to figure out what is your work permit situation going forward. And there are more options like H-1B, O visa, L visa, the new entrepreneurial visa waiver that is not still in place but is kind of in the air. So basically, you're guaranteed some leeway post-graduation, but then you have to figure out what you do. And it's not guaranteed that you will be able to figure it out. Most of the people whom I know managed to figure it out, but I know a couple of cases when people were struggling because of, I don't know the exact reasons. Maybe they waited too long. Maybe they procrastinated with some of the paperwork they should have done. But so the vast majority of people who wants to stay figures out a way to stay. And those who can't, I don't know the details of their particular cases, so I would find it hard to speak to it. But it is quite tedious. It requires quite a lot of paperwork, and it's not the easiest process.
Well, it's not the easiest process, but I hear that the most people who try to do that manage to stay and continue working on their ideas.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. I guess that you had to borrow some money in order to finance your MBA. And my question is, how quickly do you think you will be able to repay the debt upon graduation?
So the answer to the first question you asked is yes, I did had to borrow some money. I think if I would have accumulated enough money to pay for the MBA, I wouldn't have needed to get an MBA. So basically, I did borrow some money, And the standard terms. So there is a Stanford arranged loan program with one of the local banks that gives you the loan. The standard repayment horizon is 25 years in like relatively small monthly payments. You can. There is no penalty for early repayment. So when I did a very back on the envelope rough calculation of how much will it take to me to recuperate all the savings and be kind of NPV net positive on the business school. If you look at it purely financially, it was in the horizon of 2 to 5 years, depending on do I go to investment bank versus do I try to build my own company. But so this is purely financial kind of benefits and purely financial benefit analysis. If you, but I look at it more broadly than just a financial kind of financial investment. It's also an investment in my personal development. So I'm giving some discount to that.
The most interesting part, I think, is that you'll be able to remain an employee of a venture capital fund, and you'll be able to get a salary. Is that right?
Yes. So I will be. So this is exactly the downside protection that I mentioned. Is that before I raise money for my company to be able to pay myself a salary out of the investment that I raised, I will be receiving a modest, nothing crazy, but like a salary that would allow me like to rent a relatively modest apartment, not to think about how do I pay my debt, not to think about can I buy myself a coffee or not. So, and this is another reason in the list of reasons why I find the particular arrangement that I came up with this particular VC fund especially valuable to me, because after 2 years of not getting any salary, I financially cannot allow not to have a salary for another year.
That's right.
I have to get some kind of income pretty much right after graduation, or if I take like a gap month, whatever, 1-2 months post graduation, right when I start working. So if I didn't have this arrangement with, if I wasn't lucky enough, and I'm ready to admit it, that it was in significant part luck that this venture fund and me, we got hooked together. And if I wouldn't have been able to raise money to pay myself a salary until the moment I graduate, I wouldn't have been able to start a company just for purely financial reasons. Venture capital is relatively unstructured in terms of recruiting and positions. And not many funds do this particular thing. Some funds do, but I would say it's a minority, probably.
So you really need to network your way out into this specific arrangement. It's not that something that you're going to apply for on a website and get selected.
It is. So these particular guys that I'm working for, it's a fund called FJ Labs. It's they actually did a few investments in Russia too, but they mostly, I mean, they invest all over the world. They recruit 2 people per year from top business schools, namely Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, and MIT. So they come on campus and say, okay, this is us. This is the progress that we are doing. This is the process, sorry, that we are doing. These are a few companies that we have built before in this arrangement. So they are probably the only fund that I saw that openly says, okay, this is what we do. Some other funds do it in a less structured manner when you go to them and you hustle your way into this opportunity. So as I mentioned, I had 4 out of many networking emails and conversations that I had 4 interview processes with venture capital funds. And out of these four funds, two were the ones that I applied to, and two were the ones that I hustled my way in. And of those four funds, this was the only one that offered this particular arrangement of an ability to incubate a company upon graduation. All the other funds were just offering like a summer investment associate position. So it is a relatively rare arrangement. And as I said, I was really lucky to get into it.
Yeah, so what I hear is that starting a business right after business school is very difficult unless you can find an arrangement that will protect your downside.
It is more difficult than getting a corporate job, yes, which is true probably for doing business regardless of what you're doing. Because if you're smart and you're like if you do well in your job, you will always be in good demand on the labor market. It feels like, at least this is my honest opinion. And to forfeit that, to give it up, to try and do something from scratch of your own is always a harder path. And I think business school and the requirements to like repay your loans put additional constraints on it. Yes. Would I say that now? So I went into the business school with a desire to build a company, and would I say now that I would rather invested my savings into building a company? No. Is it harder for me to start a company right now? Yes. Than it would have been without the business school? Yes, financially, but no, because I have such a wider understanding of what kind of businesses exist there. And being in Silicon Valley for 2 years and seeing all the amazing speakers and entrepreneurs coming on campus and telling about their experiences has definitely helped me, and I hope will help me to become a successful entrepreneur going forward. But I imposed certain additional financial restrictions on myself by doing so, yes.
That's a very interesting conclusion and a very interesting trade-off that we arrived at. Unfortunately, we are running out of time now, Dima, and I have one last question for you. Which piece of advice would you share with prospective applicants to Stanford?
I think just be clear why you do it. I don't think that MBA is necessarily like a thing that everyone has to do to be successful in the business world. I found it useful in my particular case. A few months pre-graduation, I never regretted doing it. But be clear why you do it and what do you want to get out of it. And in order to do so, talk to the people who are going through MBA program, talk to the people who went through MBA programs, different MBA programs, and particular schools that you are more interested in, because it is a substantial financial investment. It is a substantial time investment, and it is a very serious decision. It is comparable to buying a house in terms of financial investment, and you probably want to spend some time choosing the right house. You want to spend quite some time choosing the right MBA program and just understanding, do you need a house or would you rather, whatever, buy yourself a car? So it was a clunky metaphor, but I think I hope I made myself somewhat clear.
Dima, thank you very much for your time. It was very interesting talking to you. I wish you best of luck in your endeavors and hope to talk to you later, pretty soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting. Good luck, everyone. And feel free to ask me any additional questions. We'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Dima. Cheers.